And so our objectives for today are going to be talking about the differences of My Drive versus shared drive. Which one should you be using? Which is the best case scenario based on your specific needs? We'll talk about when to use each one. And then when closer to the back of our conversation, we're also going to be talking about some file management tips. This is going to be really helpful because as we start to use more shared drives, that means you're going to be sharing file space with your colleagues. And so having some really clear file management tips and plans for how you're going to do that file management, it's going to be really beneficial for you and your team as a whole. And then we're also going to talk about file stream. So file stream is a way for us to see all of our files that are in Google Drive. We can see them on our computer. And not only that, if I were in a program like Microsoft Word or Adobe Acrobat, I can save files directly to Google Drive rather than saving them on my computer and then uploading them. What that means is I can use Google Drive as the place where I save everything. Not even just the Google Doc information, or if I'm creating Google files, I can save anything into Google Drive and it's going to stay there as long as I have it. So that's what we're going to be talking about as we get into file stream. So coming together, this is a quote actually from Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motor Company. And so I think it really speaks to this collaborative environment that we're about to get into with shared drives. And he said that coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is success. And that's really what we're trying to get to, is that successful moment where we can work together with our colleagues, not only creating and collaborating on single documents, but having a place where we can store everything effectively. So I'll mention one more thing. One of the reasons why I ask about what type of files that you're saving is I also want to bring up, just because anytime we're talking about saving files, I always want to make sure we point out that there's actually 3 types of files that the university maintains. And by that, I mean there's 3 different designations in terms of the content. There's public, there's confidential, and there's restricted. Public and confidential information, totally fine to store inside of Google Drive. That's going to include things like your email address, just general university data, statistics, things that you're emailing with your colleagues, projects that you're planning. Those are all going to be fine. The one thing that we do limit, though, is restricted information. Restricted information is going to be things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, California driver's license with ID. That's an interesting one. If you're dealing with anybody's medical information, or there's a few other pieces that fall into there. Restricted information can only be restored on encrypted machines or inside of a program called eTrieve. If you're curious about eTrieve, if your group is already using it, or if you've heard about it and you're curious about it, let us know. We also offer an eTrieve training. So if your group is already using eTrieve, that's the place where you can store the restricted information. That is a safe and secure place to put that. But we never allow restricted information at any time in Google Drive. And that's not even necessarily because we don't trust Google, it's that we don't trust anybody. It is out of an excess of caution that we take that stance. All right, so when we're talking about Google Drive in general, one of the biggest reasons why we're having this conversation is because of this idea of ownership. Ownership is really just simply who owns that file. And inside of Google Drive, so much is predicated on ownership. Who is in charge, who created, who generated this file, who has final say on where it's being stored and how it's being shared. So that ownership question is incredibly important. And so when we're using My Drive, we'll see this is a picture of just this top level of My Drive. There's a few sections here at the top that it'll tell us about that file, when it was modified, what it's called. But an important field that we often overlook is who is the owner? Who owns this file. That owner can share it with other people. They can send it out. They can make changes. But an important part to keep in mind is if the owner decides, I'm going to delete this file, it deletes it for everybody. If the owner shares it with other people and those people that they shared it with try to delete it, they can't, because the owner is in charge of whether or not that can be deleted. Now, the person that had it shared with them, they can, if they delete it, basically they're just saying, I don't want to have access to this anymore. But the owner is in charge of it. They have final say of that document. This also comes into play when we have people leave the university. Now, at the moment, IT has a method for trying to hold on to that data, but we're having, admittedly, there are some hurdles with trying to do that for every single account. You can imagine between all of the students coming and leaving the university and all of the staff and faculty that are joining and teaching and removing their accounts, at some point, we're going to have such an excess number of accounts that we have to start removing them. We just can't manage thousands and thousands and thousands of accounts year after year after year. So right now, we're trying to come up with a method to hold on to all of this university data. But the only reason why we're having to take all these big steps is because of this ownership piece. If you had a student worker working for your team and you happen to say, hey, can you start a spreadsheet for this thing we have to keep track of? And if you're using My Drive, if that student generated the file and suddenly that file becomes very important for your team, and then 3 years down the road, that student leaves the university, now we put this file into this limbo of, well, this account is no longer active, but that account owns this original file, and it's critically important for us. So what are we supposed to do? Now, on a one-to-one basis, it's not too bad. You can make a copy of a file, and now you can continue to use it as a new version of the file. But we've seen situations where there are so many files generated by people that are no longer technically active, either employees or students or faculty members at the university, that it puts some of this into question. How are we handling this ownership piece? And so it is possible from an HR standpoint that if you had an employee leave the university, if HR approves a transfer, it is possible for us to transfer the entirety of the My Drive section to somebody's supervisor. Now, this means they're transferring absolutely everything. That means personal files, that means team files, that means annual assessments, if they had some pictures on, like absolutely everything. We can't do individual files at a time. So yes, it is possible to change ownership, but it's really all I'm getting to is it takes time and it takes planning and it takes some effort to really make sure that we are keeping track of this ownership. Now, when we get over to My Drive, what you'll notice is that there's no ownership level. All we see are members. And if you think about members, members can change and that core element stays the same. So as people come and leave the university, maybe they're a student worker or they find a new position or whatever it may be, when they leave the university, we're not stuck in this place of being concerned that that original file is owned by somebody whose account at some point in the future might be purged. Shared drives don't care who created a file because the file belongs to the shared drive. So the 5 people on this first shared drive, 4 of those people could leave and 4 new people could come in. And then that 5th person changes. And then 3 years down the road, they have another full turnover of all 5 people. And it doesn't matter because all of those files created inside the shared drive stay the same. It's not tied to any sort of owner. The shared drive itself is the owner for those files. So with this in mind, Um, Already with that little piece of information, I feel confident in telling you what I think you should primarily use, and that is shared drives. Shared drives allows us to remove that ownership, all those ownership challenges, and it gives us all of that ability to create and share and be collaborative with our teammates. And if I ever change positions, maybe I stay at the university, but I within IT I move around, or Franziska takes a different position in IT. Our shared drive that we have for our team, whoever the next person that needs to join us is, we just change the membership. And then the person that left no longer has this shared drive that they don't need access to anymore. And the new person comes in and they have the entire history. And so we were able to make that change very easily and very quickly. So shared drives really are going to be the thing that I think allow us to be more flexible and guarantee that in terms of data management for the university as a whole, that we're holding on to that university data so that we're not worried about when we purge accounts, is it data that we're going to be losing that's important? So let's look at it in a different way. I'm going to try and map out some of the decision-making process you can follow when you're trying to decide, should this be a shared drive or something that I put in my drive? So shared drives are meant to be fully collaborative. That means when I make somebody a member of a shared drive, they can see and access everything inside of that shared drive without limitation. So if I allow them to work inside of that drive, they can see every single file and folder. There are no walls inside of that shared drive. And if I need to share all of the files at once. So again, it's looking at this same idea of, I don't want to go in and individually do this. What I really want to do is I want to share all of them, and I only want to do it once. So we're talking about a time saving here. If I know that this entire shared drive is about a particular project, I don't have to go in and pick and choose and make sure there's these 3 files, but then that one was just for me, and then these 3 are, well, maybe they don't need that one. We're trying to make these shared drives just a place where I make a member, they see everything, end of story. And then also if I know that membership can change, but I want all of that content to stay the same, that shared drive is going to be the best option. Now, I do have a few common examples of when to use a shared drive. So within IT training, we use shared drives a number of different ways. The first way is that we make it for our whole team. So we have a team drive, a team shared drive. And if you've been using Google for more than a year or so, you actually may remember that shared drives used to be called team drives. They changed the name to help indicate that there's more than just team drive situations when you might be using them. But that is a very good example. So Franziska and I, we put all of our team related information into one primary shared drive. And we know that anytime something's in there, it's related to something as IT training as a whole. Now, there might be individual projects. So this other example is for individual projects. So even though Franziska and I have internal IT training projects that we do all the time, there might be situations where we are interacting with other colleagues in our IT department. And in those situations, we are not shy about creating new shared drives. And so that's something that I hope you'll see through this, is that you don't have to worry about making too many shared drives. There are ways you can organize and see just the shared drives that are currently active. And so anytime you have a new project coming out, and maybe Franziska and I are starting a project, and we look and we say, actually, we need to collaborate with Terry and Terry's team at the law school. Well, we don't want to give Terry's whole team access to our internal IT training shared drive. So instead of creating this project inside of our internal only shared drive, we'll make a brand new shared drive for this one particular project. And this project may have a very specific start and end date. that's okay. We don't need this shared drive to be something that is always open and is always being worked on. We can use it for a finite amount of time and then hide it when we don't need to see it anymore. You also might see that events are really great situations for a shared drive, because a lot of times when you're planning an event with people, you might have people that you've never coordinated things with before or had shared drive that you've had with other people. So you might have people from the warehouse, you might have IT involved, you might have university events that are helping you with something. And now if you create a shared drive, you can give access to all of these different groups, and then collectively, everybody can be creating and storing and sharing the files there for that particular event. So again, we've got these two examples of something that is a finite amount of time and something that is ongoing. Shared drives works in both of these situations. The last thing I'll mention is that you can also use shared drives as a way to share templates or maybe policy information that you need to give to the entire department. Within the IT department, we've done this pretty effectively as well, because when we have a new employee that joins the IT department, what we'll do is we'll add them to a shared drive that we have that includes some of our policy decisions. There might be some standard templates that we're using or standard forms that we have for people to fill out. And so it makes it really easy for us to share all of this information with a new employee, because all we have to do is update the membership, and now they have all of this information. So it's really easy from that administrative standpoint to be able to share this information with new employees. In the past, you would have to write an email and remember all of the different documents that you had to attach to that email. And then there were too many attachments, so you had to send multiple. It got messy. So now these shared drives allow us to just share it once, and that membership is updating as people change. So in comparison, we'll also look quickly at if I'm trying to decide when to use a My Drive. So a My Drive file or folder, if this file goes away and it's only going to affect me, well, maybe that's something to put in My Drive. I put my annual reviews inside of My Drive, because I don't need that information to be available to a large number of people or have it be ongoing. That's just something that I'm keeping for my own personal experience while I'm here at the university. If I don't know if I need to share this with other people, so maybe when I start something, I'm like, you know, this might just be for me. I don't think other people are going to be involved, but just for now, I'm going to create it in a My Drive. Maybe I take another step forward and I realize, okay, I do need to share it, but it's only one file that I'm sharing. So I'm not sharing a whole bunch of stuff. It's just one single file that I need to collaborate with somebody else on. And so I'm looking at it and I realize that it's somewhat collaborative, but it's not fully collaborative. I only need people to see little pieces of a file or a folder. And so in those situations, My Drive can still make sense. So I know I said earlier, which one should you use? And I said, yes, use shared drives. I'm not trying to say you're never going to put documents in My Drive ever again, but I think if you start to use shared drives more and more, you'll see that there's very few things that maybe don't make sense in a shared drive. And a lot of that comes down to, I think, personal information related to like your personal brainstorming, or if you have scratch pads or you want to keep your performance reviews in there, that's where some of that might make sense. All right, so we're going to get right back into our next section where we're going to be talking about permissions. And so there's a lot of similarities between My Drive and shared drives. And if you remember earlier, I did sort of mention that we actually have some expanded abilities in how we can share things with people inside of a shared drive. So looking first at My Drive has three basic levels of permission. The first is view, which means I can see it. That's about it. Second level is I can comment on a file. So that allows me to either make a comment or even make suggestions. And I can be given this comment access for an individual file or for a whole folder. The last option is edit. Edit allows me to do what it sounds like. I can actually make changes to the files or organize things inside of a folder. we provide that access when we're sharing a document or a folder. When we click share, you put in the person's name, and then you can choose what level of access you're going to get them. But that happens on an individual file basis or on a folder basis. Now, with a shared drive, we have, again, very similar ones, but because we're not focusing on giving permission to one single file, we're basically making somebody a member of a shared drive. So the terminology will be slightly different. If you are a viewer, if your membership status is a viewer, it's very much like viewing a singular file. I can view everything inside of the shared drive. If you're giving me commenter access, comment and make suggestions. But then when we get to this edit section, we actually have 3 different levels of edit access. And they're broken down in this way. So the contributor level is the lowest level of edit access. That allows me to add new files, to create new files, and to make edits to all of the files. But the important part is I cannot move them and I cannot delete them. We found that a lot of people really like it when they have people that they need to maybe do some light work inside of a shared drive. They'll give them contributor access. That way they're not reorganizing or deleting files accidentally. But they can add and edit. So one thing to keep in mind with deleting files, inside of a shared drive, if somebody is able to delete, once something is deleted, after 30 days, it does disappear permanently. If you're looking at deleting files from my drive, they're actually still available indefinitely until you go and say, yes, I want to permanently delete them. But inside of a shared drive, if something is deleted, then it's got 30 days to be restored, or it goes away permanently. So because of that, they made this contributor level so that they could be creating new files, but they're not going to delete anything inadvertently. So that's that contributor level. The next one up is the content manager. Content manager is probably what most people are going to be. They can add, edit, move, they can delete files, they can restore files. Pretty general access to all of the files and folders inside of a shared drive. So you've got contributor, you've got content manager, and then finally on top, you've got the full manager. And so they can do obviously everything underneath there in terms of adding, editing, moving, but they can also manage the members status and also update the settings. Now, there doesn't have to just be one manager. In fact, I would recommend maybe having multiple managers. We've had situations before where there was just one manager for a shared drive. Maybe that person was just on vacation and we realized that, oh, we need to add somebody to this shared drive. But because there was only one manager, nobody else could manage the member status. So we actually recommend having multiple managers. And if it's people that you are that you trust and that you're fully collaborative with anyways, there may not be any reason why not to just have multiple managers involved. So depending on the size of the project, you may have many managers and many content managers and many contributors. Like, you don't have to limit yourself with a particular number. The only difference between a content manager and a manager is whether or not they can manage the members and maybe change some of the settings. So this allows us to have some additional flexibility. And to give people this access to a shared drive, you do that from the shared drive itself. At the top of the screen, you're going to click Add Members. Or if you want to change somebody's access, you click on the same section. And when you're adding somebody, you'll type out their name. And then this is where you'll choose what level of access to give them. And you can also remove members entirely if you are a manager. So this is where we do it. We do it from the top level of that shared drive. Now, some important things to keep in mind with shared drives is I've talked about how you share everything all at once inside of the shared drive. Well, what if you have just that one file? You're like, I don't want to make somebody a member for one single file. Well, you can you can share files on a singular basis. And additionally, if you have somebody Maybe you want to give them view access to the whole shared drive, but you have those 1 or 2 files where you do need them to have edit access. It is possible to increase access, but you cannot decrease access. So what that means is if I give somebody edit access to the entire shared drive, but I identify 1 or 2 files where I'm like, ooh, actually, I don't want them to be able to edit those. I just want to give them view access. Unfortunately, you cannot do that. You can, however, give somebody view access to the entire shared drive and then elevate them to edit access or comment access on an individual file basis. It also means that in a similar way, if you have somebody outside of your shared drive membership that does need to have access to this file, you can share individual files outside of the shared drive. And so that allows people to still interact with those files without becoming a full member of that shared drive. Additionally, if you are the manager, you also have the options to update some of the settings for a shared drive. And the settings I want to show you are actually related to if you have a situation where you really need to lock down a shared drive. So if you find the shared drive that you're wanting to update, you can right-click directly on that shared drive, and it opens up this little window on the left side. And this is where you can get to your shared drive settings. And inside of those settings, you have 3 different options for you to update in terms of how people can change or interact with a particular shared drive. So if you have a shared drive, and just so you know, all 3 of these are on by default. And so if you're coming in to change these, you're choosing to turn them off. So by default, it is possible to share a shared drive or files outside of Pepperdine University. If you have a reason where you want to limit that and make sure that no one outside of Pepperdine is getting these files, you can turn sharing outside of Pepperdine off. You can also choose, as the full manager, whether or not you want non-members to be able to receive individual files. So if you remember on the last slide, I mentioned you can share singular files with non-members. There's an asterisk there because it is possible to turn that off. If you are the manager and you want to make sure that no one outside of the membership is getting a document, you can turn off that option. The last thing I'll point out is if you're really just like, these are policies, these are internal documents, I don't want anyone taking these and sharing these around, but I need them to be able to see the files, you are able to limit whether or not somebody can download, copy, or even print a file. So by default, if somebody has comment or view access, they can do all 3 of these. They can download the file, they can copy the file, and keep it for themselves, or they can print. You can turn that off as a manager. Now, I would say make sure that is something that you want, but you do have that option with a shared drive. So again, this sort of hopefully opens up some possibilities with how you might use shared drives in the future. So let's talk a little bit, how do we move out of my drive and into shared drives? So we'll look at it in 3 different ways. What if I'm just moving files? That's fine, that's gonna work. Excuse me. That's gonna work without issue. As long as you are the file owner or you have edit access to the files. So if you can just see or comment on a file, you cannot move it into a shared drive. But if you're the file owner or you're the you have edit access, you can move a file into a shared drive. When you do move that file into a shared drive, that ownership is broken. So whoever was the original owner is no longer the owner. The shared drive is now the owner of that file. If you're the file owner and you can edit files in the shared drive, if you have at least contributor access, you can move it. If you have edit access to a file, you have to make sure that the original owner is also a member of the new shared drive. So what this means is if I had edit access to a file that Francisco was the owner of, and I was trying to move it into a shared drive where Francisco was not a member of the shared drive, it wouldn't let me move it even though I have edit access. If Francisco was a member of that shared drive, then as an editor, I would be able to move it. So you have to make sure that if you are not the owner, that the original owner is a member of that shared drive. So that's if I'm moving files, and I can move one file at a time, or I can move 50 files at a time. That's okay, I can move those over. Now, what about moving folders? Now, at the moment, you can't. You cannot move an entire folder into a shared drive. You can move files, but you cannot move folders. That is really just to make sure that people are aware of how these options are available to people, making sure that everyone involved with this move is ready for it and familiar with it. They also want to make sure that you're not inadvertently moving files that you didn't intend to move. And so by making you move individual files instead of entire folders, that's part of why this limitation is in place. So again, important to remember, I can move lots of files. I can even move all of the files inside of a folder, but I cannot move the entire folder. And then finally, if I'm moving maybe between different shared drives. So maybe it started in one shared drive and I want to move it. You can do that, but you must have at least manager access to move across those shared drives. To be more specific, you actually need to be manager in the original shared drive and at least have contributor access in the new shared drive. I know it gets into some specifics about contributor versus manager and what shared drive versus the other one. Basically, if it comes down to if I'm a manager, I can move stuff over. You have to have that manager access to be moving between shared drives. All right, so now with those three things in mind, you say, okay, I have that in mind. Now I do want to start moving things over to a shared drive. I've got a few tips that I think are going to be helpful. So the first one is if you are going to be moving lots of files and folders over from my drive into a shared drive, I recommend creating the entire folder structure first. And so what I mean by that is if you're moving lots of files and folders over from my drive, you're trying to mimic everything in a shared drive, start with just creating all of the folders. And so once you've done that, it makes it really easy to take all of the files out of folder 47 inside of my drive, and go over to the shared drive and find folder 47 in the shared drive, open both of those up, and then just move all of the files over. So if I can't move the entire folder, I can open it up, highlight all of the files, and click and drag and move all of those files over. So that is something that I can do. The other thing I'll mention, and this is something that we like to let you know as an option, a lot of times where this conversation ends up going is, hey, Jordan, that's like 100 different folders and 1,000 files. You're like, I can't, nobody has the time in our group to recreate that many folders. Well, I will let you know that it is possible from an admin side to move an entire folder into a shared drive. But what that requires is actually spending more time with Francisca and I. And by that, what I mean is before we can come in and help you with that sort of, that move from my drive to shared drive, so we want to make sure your whole team is ready. And so what we would like to do is if you need that sort of assistance, we want to make sure we can come in and provide training to you and your entire team to make this option available to you. Because there's a lot of pre-work that goes into it to make sure that this one folder is ready to move into a shared drive. And so when you and your team are ready for that, after we've done some training and make sure that everyone is familiar with shared drives and how they function and how it's going to be different from my drive, that's when we can come in and help you move that folder over into a shared drive. So if you want to do it on your own, you can do it. If you need some help, let us know. That is something that we really look forward to doing. We love doing trainings for entire groups. We feel like that's really where the most benefit is going to come from. Just so you know, if you're the lone cheerleader for shared drives within your group, it's going to be a long uphill struggle. If people are not ready for it and they don't want to use it, if they're not on board yet, it's a challenge because they're going to see it and go, well, I just want to share this. Why can't I share this? Or I thought I had access. And then now it's saying those little pieces where you can maybe even very easily say, oh, well, actually, it's just this thing. And even if there's a simple answer, it's going to feel like you've upset the wheel. You've overturned the table they were working on, that they've had a specific process for long amounts of time. So it can be jarring. And so what we want to do is offer our assistance in helping that sort of thing be successful. So if you do have a massive, massive, massive folder structure, it is possible, but come and talk to us and we'll help you out through that transition. All right, tip number 2. If you are doing this on your own, use the Move To option. So if you've used Google Drive, you should be able to see that you can click and drag files pretty easily, but that can be a bit challenging, especially if you're trying to move across multiple folders and down into additional folders. Clicking and dragging files works if you can see where it's going, if you can see where the end location is for that particular file. But if you can't see it easily, using the Move To option is going to be really the best way to go. Last thing I'll mention is if you are taking lots of files and you're moving them into a shared drive because you're trying to limit, you're trying to better control who has access to a file, you are going to need to go in and remove access for anyone that no longer needs that file. So if you had a file that was in a My Drive folder, and what you're trying to improve is all the different people that have access to a particular file, one thing to keep in mind is when you move a file out of My Drive and into shared drives, it doesn't break all of that previous sharing. So since I can take a file in a shared drive and I can let people have access to it, even if it's just one file, the same thing applies when I take a file and move it into a shared drive. If somebody had access to it previously, they still have access to it. So if they were able to comment on a document when it was in My Drive and you move it into a shared drive, even if they're not a member, they will still have comment access to that file. So if you're trying to sever those connections because you're trying to limit access in this new shared drive environment, there is still some work you're going to have to do to go in and double check some of that access. Then we're now going to get into file management. This is an important part to keep in mind when we're going to be looking at how do we create and share files within our teams. Because when everything's in My Drive, a lot of times people kind of take it as oh, well, it's just for me. I can organize it how I want to. Or maybe they are organizing for their whole team, but a lot of these considerations haven't been taken into effect. And so when you're trying to find particular files or you're trying to create new files, file management for teams is a challenge. And so I've got a few ideas that I think can be helpful. And again, these are all meant to be done as an entire team. This is not one person deciding and then just letting people know. This needs to be a team discussion. And so one thing I'll let you know that is when Franziska and I started the IT training group a couple of years ago, one of the very first things that we did is we sat down as a team and decided, how do we want our shared drive to look? What is the expectation for this long-term shared drive that we're going to continually be creating new content for? how do we want to manage this information? And so we looked at a number of different things to make this make sense for everybody involved. So the first thing we did is we made a plan. We plotted out how we wanted our folder structure to work. And you can see, and I'll even give you some real world examples. So here is our training shared drive. And so all of these top level folders are things that we tried to plot out as much in advance as possible. And we talked through, okay, what's different between a special project and just a standard work in progress? And then at what point do we take something out of works in progress and move it to finished topics? And we may have these individual topics, but how are custom group trainings different? And do we want to put all of our attendance in with our meeting notes, or do we want to have a separate folder for that? So these were all things that we plotted out all the way down into even in our finished training topics. So here's the one that we're doing today. We're doing organize everything shared drives. If I open that up, you're going to see all of the things that I'm working on off today. Some of you might have even we had a quiz. If you hadn't taken one of our previous trainings, some of you took this quiz. And then inside of here, we even have development options. So this was all of our files that we used to kind of help plan this meeting or this presentation. So I know that anytime Franziska or I start a new topic for training, we're going to start it in a particular place. And then inside of there, we're going to have a particular number of expectations in terms of what folders. And then the final outcome, I know there's always going to be a facilitator's guide, a presentation in PDF form, and what file we're going to be presenting from. So we did all of that work as much as we could beforehand to make sure that our folders always make sense. And so if I'm creating it or Franziska's creating it, we know what folder expectations there are for those different sections.
Hey, Jordan.
Yeah.
I just made some stuff for the Google Forms class. Where would that be?
That is going to be in Works in Progress. And it's an Essentials, so I know that's Google Forms. And here we go. We have an outline. We have some other documents, maybe even a test form that we're going to be using. I didn't even know she was doing that. But if she had said, hey, I started this for forms, I know exactly where to look because we know that expectation for those different topics. Great active example, Franziska. So not even just the folders, we also need to have a plan for our names. And so we want to pick a format for our particular naming conventions and stick to it. So for example, I'm going to go back into this finished training topics. We've determined that anytime we're going to have a facilitator's guide or slides presentation, we're using some of this same terminology all of the time. And that's so if I were trying to find something, even if I didn't know it was even created yet, I would be able to find it because we're using the same naming structure over and over and over again. So I can just guess based on our naming structures if there's going to be a particular file that's available, even if I said, hey, Franziska, can you go start the class for forms? And maybe I said, hey, this is your thing, run with it. And then 2 months from now, I say, oh, I wonder how that's going. I could probably do a couple of searches that are going to help me find all of the documents for that file because I know, or for that training, because I know some of the same naming structures that we use over and over again.
I think a good example of that is what happened recently, where you could just go into the search and look up, handout, and see if there was a handout for a popular question that we get, something that we created.
Yeah, so there was, recently there was a PDF, there was a walkthrough or a guide that I thought somebody had created previously, but I wasn't sure, and I was able to find it even though I wasn't the one that created it. I think it was some sort of PeopleSoft guide. Yeah, so I think it might have been one of these PDFs. but we had it, and I was able to pull it up and share it with somebody really quickly because I knew that expectation about how that was going to be created and shared. This search is incredibly powerful. I'll just show you an example. If I just type in the word training, I mean, has access to all of these training documents. How many results do you think it's going to get? Huge amount. But the one that I'll point out, let's see if it comes up near the top. Yeah, here it is. So if you notice, this is an image, and the image does not have the word training in the title. But if I open up this image, there's even text inside of the image that says training, and it was able to find it. So this is an incredibly powerful search. It's not just looking for the document name. It's looking for all of the content inside of that particular file. It doesn't even have to be a text file to be able to find text that says training. Yeah, it's not just looking for the title. It's looking through the entire document or file. All right, so making a plan, folders and names. Now, thinking about names, we also want to keep it simple. So we're thinking about how easily can I search for something. You don't want to get really complicated alphanumeric names that almost feel like passwords because there's so many. You don't need to truncate things. You want to keep in mind when I'm typing out the name for a document, would I be able to guess what this is? Would I be able to search for it? Could I put in a few keywords and probably be able to find what I'm looking for? You want to think about that, especially when you start to be making things that other people need to find and may not remember that you titled it 0401 2020 underscore teams PS info. What is that? I have no idea what that is. So as long as you're keeping it something that can be searchable, that's a really important part. And so in that same vein, keep it natural. Make file names that make sense. You want people to be able to find the items that they weren't the ones that specifically created. So having simple names is a really important part of this to make sure that everyone is able to access all of those files without having been the one that generated it in the first place. Another thing you can do inside of a shared drive is create archives for old items. Now, this isn't like an action you take. You're not like highlighting things and saying, okay, I want to archive this. All I mean is create a folder called archive. And so as maybe older projects stop being useful, or if there's pieces that maybe you want to reduce the amount of content that's on inside of a particular folder, you can start to create additional folders called archives and just move them in there. That way you can kind of keep things clean and neat without over cluttering particular shared drives. Trying to think if I have any examples of that quickly accessible. Oh, well, I mean, part of what we do is in our finished training topics, instead of calling it archives, let me go to Gmail Essentials. Instead of calling it archives, we call it development inside of this particular folder. But you'll see if I open this up, there was a lot of development that went into the various different versions of our Gmail classes. In fact, I have older versions from many years ago. So here's getting started with Google Mail. I think we first generated that when we switched the university over almost 4 years ago. This was a presentation that was created and given, but I know that if I needed to get back to it, it was in that development or that archival space for Gmail trainings. And so again, trying to, if we weren't doing this type of thing and I were to open the Google Essentials folder, I would be seeing so many files that would make it hard to keep track of what's most pertinent. So we have different ways that we can start to reduce the clutter, but still keep it all contained inside of this shared drive. So using archival type situations are great to keep things organized. I'll also mention that this is really good. If you've never had this experience, don't worry about it. But if you've ever been in a situation where you do need somebody to transfer ownership of files to you, it can be kind of challenging because then suddenly you have this whole massive set of files from somebody else. And so using folders called archives is a really easy way for you to get things off your screen, organize them, put them in a place that you know it's kind of long-term storage, but they're not going to be cluttering up active spaces that you're working. The last one I'll mention that you can do as a team, or actually no, not as a team, but if your team is making lots and lots of shared drives and you're starting to feel like, I have too many shared drives. Jordan said, keep making shared drives, and now I've got 100 shared drives and I'm only using 5 of them. What am I supposed to do? Well, you can hide unused shared drives. And so to do that, I would go over to my shared drives. And if I see this one, it's called ITCOM General. If I decided, I don't really need access to this one anymore, and not that I don't need access to it, but I'm not actively using it. Can I hide it from this view so I only see the 3 that are most important to me at this moment? So I can right-click on that shared drive, and I can say hide shared drive. And so these are now considered my active shared drives that I have access to. And in the top right corner of the screen, I can see my hidden shared drives. And now I'm going to see all of the ones that I have hidden. Now, at this test account, I don't have many, but if I were to go to my my primary account and open up my shared drives, I have a lot of active shared drives. And if I open up my hidden, I have even more. So I use this hide or unhide option to make it really easy for me to keep track of the ones that are active. And any of the ones that aren't, I move them and I hide them. So that's something that I do to help keep track of which ones are active and which ones aren't. Now in our next section, we're going to be talking about file stream. So one thing I'll just mention before we get into it, file stream is a way for us to see all of our files on our local computer. So I can see everything in Google Drive. I can see it on my local computer. But since we're talking about hiding and unhiding shared drives, one thing to keep in mind is if I have a shared drive that's hidden, saying I don't want to see it actively on my screen, you're also not going to see it with file stream. So just something to keep in mind as a possibility here. All right, so the last piece of this that really makes Google Drive incredibly powerful and useful for you is this file stream tool. And so file stream is what puts access to all of my files locally on my computer. And the really powerful part of this is not just that I can open them up from my computer, but I can save directly to Google Drive. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. So I have this sandbox that I have here. And if you notice, I've got a few different examples inside of this little sandbox for today. The first one, this is a Microsoft Word file. You see that it's a Microsoft Word file because it has this W, and it says that it's a .docx. So this tells me this is an actual Word file. If I were to double click on it, I could view this file. And if you notice, this is something that I've given this example a few times. So you'll see there's some stuff going on here. This highlighted text is in orange. So this is an actual Word file. Well, with file stream, if I said I want to open this up in Microsoft Word and make some changes, I don't have to download this file, make the change, save it as version 2, and then upload. All I do is I come over to my computer. I can use my regular file, my Finder, and when I have Google Drive installed, when I have FileStream installed, I can now see all of Google Drive right here on my File Explorer. And so I can go to my shared drives. I can find that sandbox, and here is this Word file. And so now when I double click on this Word file, again, using my File Explorer on my computer, what FileStream is doing is it's quickly streaming that file down to my computer, and it opens up in Microsoft Word. So I'm going to take a look at this. I'm going to clear out all this extra text that was here. This is already highlighted, but I'm going to change it from orange to green. I'm going to cover this one. So I'm going to highlight it again, but I'm going to highlight it in black, add more text. I'm going to say more text for April, what's today, the 2nd, April 2 training class. And I don't have to save as something else. I don't have to save it to a new location because I opened it up from Google Drive and I have FileStream on my computer. I just click save. And now that it's saved, I can close Word. If you look at the top of my screen, you can kind of see I have this little Google Drive. This is FileStream working. If I open it up, it'll tell me that it's syncing things. So I see, oh, it's synced, cool. Now I'm gonna go take a look at it. And here it is, at 3:20, Jordan Lott modified this file. So if I double click, there are all those changes that I made. So I was able to still use Microsoft Office and save it directly to Google Drive. So I can still use all these native apps, but have the save location be Google Drive. And now if Franziska were to say, oh, I need to update that Microsoft Word file, she could open it up on her computer using Microsoft Word, make a change, click save, and then it's going to update here in Google Drive. So all of the usage that we were using for our networked drives, which was so that I could use these Microsoft Office files, with this combination of shared drives and FileStream, it takes away, not takes away, but it can fully replace all of those situations we had where we were trying to use these Microsoft Office specific files so that we could collaborate with our colleagues. So FileStream allows us to do this. And it's not just Microsoft Office. I can even open up a PDF file. It's a very similar document here. So this opened up in Acrobat. This was a highlighted piece of text. I can remove that highlight. I can make edits here. Make highlights. I can add text. There it is, edit PDF. So I can add some text here. I click save. And again, I'm just showing you again, I'm not limited to one particular type of file. Now when I come over to the PDF, it may take just a second for that sync to complete, but now it shows that it's synced. Over here, it shows me the updated time. I open it up and it matches that content that I just updated using Adobe Acrobat. So again, just to show you, FileStream really makes it fully flexible that I can use and generate new files inside of Google Drive, or I can keep using those desktop applications that people might be using for specific purposes. Those are my quick examples of how to do FileStream. Typically when we're physically in person with you, we would say, hey, go and install FileStream right now. I would say go ahead and give it a shot. If you have any questions, our client services team can help you. So if you want to give them a call, our Tech Central desk is open and active. You can give them a call and they can help you out. If you do want to download FileStream, you can get there by going to the gear icon at the top right corner of the screen and clicking Get Drive for Desktop. And so this will take you to the place where you can download and install FileStream. Now, I will let you know, I have seen in a number of things have popped up recently where it'll download and install but for whatever reason, it pops up in an odd place in your file explorer or your finder. So I actually do recommend at this point, if you want to give it a shot on your own, go for it. But be ready to call our IT service desk. Our Tech Central group, they can provide technical support. They're very familiar with installing Drive file stream. And if they need to hop on, they can actually come in, and if you allow them, they can remote into your computer and make sure those last steps are completed. So that is file stream. That's how you can get it installed, how you can use it with the programs that are local to your computer. With that in mind, I do want to mention just one more thing. We went over a lot of information today. Realistically, the way that people learn, there's a lot of this that you might not remember once we end our session. And that's okay. We recognize that. And so what we want to make sure you know, and one thing that you do hopefully remember, is that you have access to the G Suite Learning Center. So if you're in Google Drive, in the top right corner of your screen, next to the gear icon, you'll also see a little question mark. And so if you click on the question mark and go to training, that's going to take you directly to the G Suite Learning Center. You'll see it up at the top. And right now, since I was looking at Google Drive, it's taking me to the Learning Center section for Google Drive. And if I scroll down, I'll see there's a section for getting started with Google Drive. There's also a section for getting started with shared drives. So when I was generating this course, when Franziska and I were working on this, this is where we came to learn all the different ins and outs of shared drive that we may not have known about. So this is the tool that we used to generate this class. This information is incredibly helpful. It starts on a step-by-step basis. It walks you through each piece one at a time. So if there's anything that you want to go back and review, or you want to, oh, I don't remember how to do that one particular thing. I know it's possible, but I don't remember how to do it. Come and use the G Suite Learning Center and get that refresher, get that recap on how these different shared drive pieces work and function. With that, I would like to thank you for your time. Please feel free to reach out to Franziska and I even after today. We are a resource to you. Our entire job focus is helping university employees to use the existing technology and to use it well. So please feel free to reach out to us, but that's our time today. I really appreciate everybody stopping in. We are adjourned for today.